Dámy a pánové, dovolte mi, abych vás přivítal jménem Komise pro životní prostředí Akademie věd na této konferenci a přirozeně, že jí přeju, aby splnila vaše očekávání. Ladies and gentlemen, it is great pleasure to welcome you in Prague by the name of Czech Academy of Sciences, and I wish you all the best in this conference.
Dobrý den, dámy a pánové. Já bych vás chtěl taky přivítat jménem Českého spolku pro agrolesnictví na této konferenci. Já jsem moc rád, že jste se dostavili v takovém hojném počtu a že agrolesnictví je vidět, že vás zajímá. Já bych chtěl zejména poděkovat obou ministerstvům, to znamená Ministerstvu životního prostředí a Ministerstvu zemědělství, že zaštítilo tuto konferenci, a rozhodně ještě Akademii věd, které Komisi pro životní prostředí, že zorganizovala tuto konferenci v tomto krásném sálu. Proč se bavíme v současné době o agrolesnictví? Já jenom na začátek řeknu, pevně věřím, že už všichni víte, co agrolesnictví je. My jsme pořádali několik setkání, konferencí a podobně. Ale agrolesnictví je kombinace vlastně pěstování stromů nebo dřevin na zemědělské půdě s jakoukoliv další zemědělskou produkcí. Nejedná se tedy o zalesňování zemědělských půd, ale opravdu nám jde o to nazpátek dostat stromy do zemědělské krajiny. Jak už jsem předeslal, v minulosti jsme pořádali několik takových setkání, konferencí a podobně. Téměř před rokem dokonce jsme měli jednu podobnou konferenci v Českém parlamentu a je vidět, že zájem o tuto formu hospodaření roste a proto jsme se snažili i s oboma ministerstvemi zorganizovat to, aby jsme pozvali asi poprvé do Prahy vlastně hlavní osoby evropského agrolesnictví. A doufám, že oni, já bych jim chtěl poděkovat, že taky sem vážili tu cestu na tento den, že vám představí, jak může fungovat agrolesnictví nejen v Evropě, ale i ve světě. Ale abych nemluvil stále já, jenom ještě trošku řeknu organizační věci. Teď budou dvě další prezentace, pak bude obědová pauza, bude tady připraveno malé občerstvení tady v předsálí a samozřejmě si můžete zajít i na občerstvení dolů nebo kamkoliv jinam. A pak budeme pokračovat odpoledne. Samozřejmě po každé prezentaci bychom byli rádi, aby byly dotazy, ale poprosil bych vás, abyste počkali, až se k vám dostane mikrofon, protože bez toho vás neuslyší ani překladatelé nemůžou správně přeložit. Samozřejmě dotazy můžete pokládat v češtině nebo v angličtině. Kdo nemá sluchátka a chtěl by, tak si ještě vemte, protože prezentace budou v angličtině, ale budou simultánně překládány. Tak a to je asi všechno. Já nebudu dále zdržovat. A rád bych nejdříve záštitu nad touto konferencí převzalo Ministerstvo zemědělství jménem ministra Tomana. Bohužel ten tu nemohl být a proto bych rád přivítal náměstka Pavla Sekáče, který by řekl takové úvodní slovo.
Děkuji zároveň za to uvítání. Dovolte mi i, abych vás všechny pozdravil za rezort zemědělství i skrze má ústa zdravici od pana ministra. Jak jste si asi všimli i z programu, nejsem ani ministrem životního prostředí, ani náměstek Dolejský. Opravdu toto vystoupení tady měli přednes kolegové z životního prostředí, ale jsem rád, že i symbolicky to Agroforestry tuto konferenci zahajujeme my. A ta symbolika je v několika málo, řekněme, věcech. Za prvý, když se podíváme na českou krajinu, která nějakým způsobem vykazuje známky hospodaření minulých dekád, tak Agroforestry je do jisté míry vyústěním určité iniciativy lidí, kteří se kolem tohoto tématu pohybují je to do jisté míry i vyústění možná i logiky v současných jaksi parametrech a změnách klimatu, které nás potkávají. A já věřím, že to zároveň otvírá toto téma, že otvírá zároveň i možnost diskutovat přístup hospodaření, který v historii a v dějinách lidstva tady byl, možná jenom, že jsme od některých prvků odhlédli. A to je dobré všechny tyto aspekty tady prolnout. Já věřím, že tato konference a tyto prezentace, které tady budou, já ještě potom na konci mám tu příležitost tento celý den shrnout, spíše z pohledu rezortu, co jsme schopni udělat v rámci celého toho cyklu nastavování společné zemědělské politiky. Ale to, v co já vkládám velkou naději, že zaprvé se nám tady sešly kapacity a lidé ze zahraničí, za což organizátorům děkuji a děkuji i za to, že kolegové, ať už z akademie nebo z České zemědělské univerzity a i z ostatních výzkumných pracovišť se tohoto tématu chytli. Jsem moc rád za určitou jejich míru urputnosti. To tady podtrhuji, ta urputnost vždy k nějakým takovým a podobným aktivitám patří, protože bez urputnosti těžko lze dosáhnout nějakého cíle. Nicméně věřím v to, že právě ty informace a zkušenosti, které sem přicházejí ze zahraničí a které kolegové ze zahraničí i z té akademické sféry a ze zkušeností přináší, že tady budeme moci zhmotnit. Ono o to víc ty zkušenosti je potřeba sbírat, vyhodnocovat, protože struktura hospodaření v České republice je trochu jiná. My se nemůžeme srovnávat se zeměmi, kde agroforestry de facto přežilo jako tradiční způsob i hospodaření. V některých zemích se k tomuto systému hospodaření vrací, ale je pravdou, a to podtrhuji hnedka na úvod, není to něco neznámého, není to ani nějaký omyl, není to ani nějaká ekonomická vývojová slepá větev, protože o tomto způsobu hospodaření začíná i jako o obligátním hovořit Evropská komise a sám komisař Hogan už z jeho úst a i z úst pracovníků DG Agri je slyšet, že tento management a tento způsob hospodaření je způsob hospodaření, který by se měl vrátit do systému. Je to i, a znova podtrhuji, já v tom vidím dvě naděje, a to je změna mozaiky krajiny, české krajiny, protože to, kdo zná letecké snímky, tak ví, že tohle je jeden aspekt. A druhý aspekt, který s kolegy velmi vážně diskutujeme, je klima a obecně vztah výpar na otevřených plochách, kde by v podstatě stromový pokryv mohl nějakým způsobem, ta kombinace agro a forestry mohl přinést své plody. Já se těším na tuto konferenci, na jeho výsledky. Já jsem si na tento den vyhradil v podstatě celý den tak, abych tady mohl nasávat informace, protože nemám rád takový ty úvodníky, kdy přijde nějaký zástupce rezortu, někde něco řekne, moudře pozdraví, zmizí, pak se někde zjeví zase na konci, zase něco řekne, co mu napíšou a pak zase je z toho nic. Tak prosím slibuji, že tady budu nasávat ty zkušenosti a budu tady připraven na celodenní diskuzi. Zároveň mi i dovolte pozdravit ostatní kolegy a jsem rád, že vážili cestu a organizátorům ještě jednou díky za organizaci této akce a věřím, že toto, já tomu si dovolím říct, domovskému prostředí a takové té i domovské atmosféře, protože nás tady je opravdu pár, takže ten den bude konstruktivní a že sdílení těch informací nám všem přinese to, co od toho očekáváme. Moc děkuji vám všem, přeju příjemný úspěch konference, abyste se nikdo nenudili a já ještě jednou děkuji i za příležitost, že mám tu čest tady s váma strávit dnešní den. Děkuji.
Já rozhodně děkuji panu náměstkovi za tohle slova. Určitě bych chtěl v poslední době ocenit, jak Ministerstvo zemědělství vlastně převzalo velkou aktivitu nad agrolesnictvím, vlastně pravidelně se scházíme a vlastně připravujeme, doufám, že to bude úspěšně zakončeno, i nějakou podporu v rámci programu rozvoje venkova na agrolesnictví do budoucích let. Děkuji teda za to. Já bych chtěl české agrolesnictví, myslím si, v současné době by se rozvíjí zejména tím, že jsme začali výrazně spolupracovat s Asociací soukromého zemědělství a Asociace soukromého zemědělství si vzala české nebo agrolesnictví obecně pod svá křídla a výrazně ho prosazuje. Zejména agrolesnictví je vhodné právě pro menší nebo rodinné farmy. A jsem rád za to, že vlastně agrolesnictví se v posledních 2 letech začalo tady výrazně propagovat, rozvíjet a pokračovat, zejména díky Asociaci soukromého zemědělství. Proto bych tady přivítal a požádal bych i jejího předsedu Josefa Stehlíka za pár slov.
Dobré dopoledne, dámy a pánové. Já děkuji za pozvání a jsem rád, že můžu aspoň na začátek krátce vystoupit k té dnešní konferenci. Ono to tady už zaznělo. My jsme jako asociace spolu s kolegy, s panem Lojkou, s Radimem Kotrbou opravdu urputně se snažili přesvědčit Ministerstvo zemědělství o tom, jak důležité agrolesnictví pro potřebu české krajiny teď i do budoucna je a že je potřeba hledat cesty pro to, aby se zaprvé vytvořily podmínky pro to, aby vůbec sedláci, zemědělci mohli na zemědělské půdě sázet stromy a zároveň je užívat tím způsobem agrolesnickým, aby zároveň na to měli nějaké vhodné motivační prostředky, jak na založení, tak pak samozřejmě na ten vznik a na to zapojení porostů. A aby samozřejmě jsme třeba i v české legislativě odstranili disproporce, které de facto neumožňují nám zemědělcům, aby jsme třeba měli větší počet stromů na pastvinách, nebo aby jsme vlastně na zemědělské půdě sázeli bez toho, aniž bychom museli převádět do jiné kultury lesní stromy. Takže zaplať pánbůh za to, že se tato diskuze nejen začala a poměrně teď intenzivně se na ní pracuje, ale že je i snaha, aby se to převedlo do reálného života, protože to bude to nejdůležitější. To, že se sejdeme, dobře si popovídáme o tom, jak je to prima a jak je to pěkný a jak to určitě krajině pomůže a lidé budou spokojení, protože uvidějí hezkou krajinu, tak pak vždycky tyto dobré myšlenky mají problém při té své realizaci, aby skutečně se to dokázalo dostat až do reálného života a stalo se to potřebou toho sedláka. Minimálně v těch místech té krajiny a toho hospodaření, kde jsou velké celky půdní, nepředělené, nepřerušené, kde není dostatek například lesů těch klasických, tak aby tuto formu hospodaření, aby na ní přistoupil a zvolil. Takže to bude nyní nejdůležitější úkol, najít ty vhodné formy, zapojit do toho i Ministerstvo životního prostředí, které bohužel teda dneska má Ačko, jeho šéfové, myslím teď jeho šéfové, pardon, tak to se omlouvám, tak já jsem viděl pana náměstka, nejdřív pana ministra, pana náměstka, takže ty mají Ačko, tak abych to teda řekl úplně přesně. Dobře, ale přesto si myslím, že tak důležitá akce, jako je ta dnešní, tak si myslím, že je potřeba s ní pracovat, protože my hledáme už několik let vztah a spolupráci s Ministerstvem životního prostředí v tom smyslu, aby jsme i jejich programy dokázali aplikovat na naši zemědělskou půdu. A pořád se to nedaří. A já teď neříkám, že je chyba na straně životního prostředí a na straně sedláků, ne. Myslím si, že tam ta cesta se pořád hledá složitě z toho důvodu, že nedokážeme sladit některé momenty. A poslední moje připomínka k tomu dnešnímu setkání je ta, že já jsem někdy před pár lety, tak asi 10 let tomu nazpátek, našel takový deník podrobný mého předka z přelomu, nebo na konci 19. století psanýho, ten deník. A ten můj pradědek, ten Václav Stehlík, tak tam psal vždycky každý rok, co se odehrávalo v tom hospodářství, a to je na straně rodiny, tak i na straně samozřejmě toho samotného hospodaření. A vedle toho, že tam popsal, že se někdo narodil nebo někdo umřel, vedle toho, že se urodilo nebo neurodilo, že byly myši, sucho, mokro, tak tam nikdy nezapomněl poznamenat, že ten rok vysázel stromy tam a tam, švestky tam a tam a další a tak dále. A bylo to téměř na stejné úrovni jeho vnímání toho svého reálného života, jako to běžné hospodaření v tom statku. A to si myslím, že je ta nejlepší ukázka, nebo nejlepší ukázka toho, co vlastně to agrolesnictví je. Sazení takovýchto činností do běžné zemědělské praxe. Děkuji za pozvání, budu velice pozorně poslouchat, co tady dneska uslyšíme a věřím, že ty věci budeme realizovat v praxi. Já už jsem letos svých prvních 15 stromů na pozemcích zemědělských zasadil, takže věřím, že ostatní budou mít tu motivaci taky. Děkuji za pozornost.
Já děkuji moc panu předsedovi za tahle slova a jsem moc rád, že už nejsme urputní jenom my v Českém spolku pro agrolesnictví, ale urputná i Asociace soukromého zemědělství, aby se agrolesnictví prosadilo. Já bych chtěl uvést, že pan náměstek Dolejský bohužel tady nemohl být na začátek, ale přijde někdy během oběda, takže potom pronese taky pár slov k vám. Chtěl bych jenom předestřít taky, že nejenom Asociace soukromého zemědělství je tu, ale jsou tu i zástupci z Agrární komory a z Českomoravského svazu zemědělských podnikatelů, takže doufám, že i vás tato přednáška zaujme a třeba budete podobně urputní v prosazování agrolesnictví. Teď už bych nezdržoval a šel bych k vlastnímu programu. První by měl vystoupit Patrick Worms. I will switch to English now and introduce him. So very shortly, Patrick Worms is trained as a molecular geneticist at Cambridge, and currently he's a senior science policy advisor for the World Agroforestry Center, which is the main organization that is doing agroforestry worldwide. Patrick sits at the nexus of land restoration and human security. Currently, he's also a president of the European Agroforestry Federation and a member of a steering committee of Initiative for Land, Lives and Peace, and fellow of the Evergreen Global Alliance, and serves on a number of advisory boards. So he's really one of the key person for European agroforestry. He's got also lots of experience, mainly from tropical agroforestry. We spoke yesterday, and he has experience also from Africa, Asia, not so much in Latin America, I guess. Moreover, he has connection to the Czech Republic because his wife is Czech from Brno. So I warmly welcome you to have a short speech for us.
Thank you very much, Bohdan. Yes, indeed, my wife is Czech, and she tells me I'm a wonderful husband, except in one regard. I never learned the language. I'm very sorry. Now, Bohdan, as you pointed out, my experience is with tropical agroforestry, so it was with a certain sense of trepidation that I accepted the call from my European colleagues to lead them as the president of the European Agroforestry Federation. But I've discovered since that this gives me the best job in the world and the worst carbon footprint in the world. I understand how trees can help, and I've seen it in humid tropic areas, I've seen it in dry zones, I've seen it in hot zones, I've seen it in cold zones, I've seen it on mountains, I've seen it on plains, I've seen it in rich places, I've seen it in poor places. But at the same time, in order to see all that, I fly a lot. And very often, in the middle of the night, I wake up and I panic. I panic because we are completely and utterly fucked. And I apologize for the word, but it is the only one that matters here. The tools that the world has put in place to try to deal with the collapse of Earth's systems, including the climate, are not working. What you see on this chart is a list of every single meeting that the globe has had under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change to deal with emissions, and superimposed on that a curve of greenhouse gas emissions. Not only is it not going down, it's not even stopping. We are walking heedless into disaster. And this is beginning to affect farming, and thus food prices, and thus hunger around the world. These are pictures from Europe. We had a nasty drought in Northern Europe. You had it in the Czech Republic, we had it in Belgium. And you can simply compare satellite pictures of the same place in July 17 and July 18 to see the impact that has had. But it's not stopping. This is Australia, the 2018 growing season. Australia is one of the world's wheat breadbaskets. Compare the drought in 2018 with the kind of rainfall that they've had in previous years. And when the rain comes, sometimes it comes too much. This is the city of Beira in Mozambique. It is the first city to have been destroyed by climate change when the largest cyclone ever to hit Africa slammed into southern Africa a few months ago. That also affected agriculture. Most of the maize crop in Malawi, Mozambique, Zimbabwe was compromised, and a lot of it was washed away. And it's not just in the poor world. This is the flooding that is affecting the Midwest right now. A perfect combination of disasters. First, a polar vortex with very, very, very low temperatures. The ground froze, and it froze hard. Lots of snow on it. Then, within 3 days, the temperature rose by 30 degrees, and the rain came. Massive rains, the kind of rains that you normally only ever see in the tropics. The snow melted, but the ground was still frozen. Massive, massive, massive erosion as a result. And we are not just, we, the farmers, the agricultural community, we are not just suffering from this, we are also one of the primary drivers of this. About a quarter of all emissions worldwide come from the way we manage our land. The way we farm, the way we plant forestry, the way we raise our cattle, and the way we transform our landscapes to meet our needs. It's higher than the emission of industry. It's higher than the emission of transport. It's much, much higher than the emission of cars. Sorry, Elon Musk, Tesla is nice, but it doesn't really make that difference. And by doing that, we're making the problem even worse. Because the biggest reservoir of carbon on the planet that we can affect directly is in the soils. And we are degrading these soils massively. We tend to think of it as a problem that affects the tropics or the subtropics, poor countries like the Sahel here or like Southern Africa. But it's everywhere. The Brazilian Cerrado, where so much of the world's maize and soy comes from. The American Midwest, which is feeding much of the poor world in drought years. The black earth of Ukraine, China, everywhere degradation is going on. And degradation is this. When you go from the map down to the ground, it's when you take a walk on a rainy Sunday close to your house, as I did, and you see the soil being washed away because the soil is bare and the wind is coming. Or after the harvest, when the wind is blowing and it's been dry for a little bit, and it's often dry, especially now that we have more and more drought, when the soil is simply blown away by the wind. That's what land erosion means. And on geological scales, it's blindingly fast. But sadly, on human time scales, it seems slow. The land still looks much the same as it did when I was a kid, and I'm 53 years old. So unless we remind ourselves time and time again through science of how rapidly we're changing this planet, we could simply be sleepwalking into disaster. Of course, what does this mean? It means more carbon in the atmosphere. It means food prices going up. And that means instability. The Arab Spring, that was related to food prices. This is coming back. It means lower yields. It means lower resilience. And it means less carbon in the soil. But you can change it. In the poor world, it also means hunger. And that's why agroforestry is so important. The picture on the left was taken around Zinder in Niger. I was there a couple of weeks ago in the 1980s. In that landscape, you can't grow anything. Yes, there is rain, but it comes for 2 or 3 months, and then after that you have 9 to 10 months of very hot weather without any clouds at all. Unless your crops have enough time to grow during the rainy season, you won't harvest anything, so it's hard. On the right is the same landscape today. It's covered with trees. And under these trees, people are now growing somewhere between 1 and 4 tons of cereals per year, even in drought years. In that particular landscape, people are happy when a drought comes because they're still harvesting. But the neighbors who don't have trees have to buy food in the market, and the price of food in the market is rising. So if you're a farmer in that environment, you make more money on a drought year than you do in a good year. And of course, these trees are putting carbon straight back into the soil, and they're protecting the crops from storms and from the hot sun, so resilience rises. That is why, when you look at these two charts, this one showing trees outside forests, and this one showing human population densities, what you see is that they're almost the same. That's because wherever there are people, there are trees. And the reason why that is because trees work for their living. You know, sometimes I feel a little bit sorry for my colleagues in the forestry departments, because they're planting a tree, and then the poor sods, they have to wait 20, 30, 40 years before they get any money back, because they're waiting for that damn tree to grow, to cut it, to sell it. In an agroforestry system, that tree is working throughout its life. And the money you get at the end when you cut it and resell it is just the cherry on the cake. And it works everywhere. Here is an example from southwest France, where you have a timber wheat alley cropping system. Here is an example from Nicaragua, where coffee is grown under timber shade trees. Here is an example from Russia and Central Asia. If you ever fly to India and you look out the window, you see this landscape across much of Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Russia. Thousands upon thousands upon thousands of square kilometers of windbreaks planted in Soviet times to reduce wind speeds, reduce soil erosion, and increase yields. And there's fantastic research that was done back in those days. I saw some of it in Tashkent in Uzbekistan, showing that the grain yield rises between 15 and 20% in that environment, but that the protein content of the kernel rises too. So you get more grain, and you get grain of a higher quality. Sadly, it was published in the 1950s or 60s in Russian. It's not yet been digitized. It's not yet available on Google. But it's there. It's tantalizing. There's so much good work out there if we just recognize it. You have examples that are closer to home. This is a silver pastoral system in Poland. And it resembles this system, which is a shea butter system in Burkina Faso. In the humid tropic systems, you have things that look more complicated. Bananas, coffee, vanilla in Uganda. But it also works in extremely Arctic systems. This is, in fact, Europe's biggest agroforestry system. Or sometimes you're in Brazil, and you've all seen pictures of these oil palm plantations, these monocultures, which are replacing the rainforest. Well, this is our oil palm plantation. You can tell there's an oil palm in the middle of all that mess. You know what that makes? It's coffee, it's cacao, it's bananas, it's achai, it's vegetables in the first few years, it's timber trees. And it's a higher productivity of oil, even without counting all of these other things. And here is what is probably the most productive farming system on Earth. It looks like a rainforest, and if you don't know what you're looking at, you can walk straight through it and think you're in a forest, not realize you're in a farm. These systems in Sumatra churn out between 20 and 25 different products per farm. The farms are typically between 2 and 4 hectares big, no bigger, because it's so complicated to manage. No human brain can manage that at a much bigger scale than that. And the value of these products is somewhere between $2,000 and $3,000 per hectare. So per family, that's somewhere between $10,000 and $15,000 income per year. In a poor country like Indonesia, that means a concrete house, a satellite dish on the roof, and a motorbike in the yard. It's progress, it's development. Sometimes you have inverted agroforestry system. This is probably my favorite because the agroforestry component is the small shrubbery in the middle. The crop are the coconuts. The small shrubbery in the middle is a legume. It fixes nitrogen, and it feeds the coconuts. It's called Gliricidia. You coppice it every couple of years. You get long, straight shoots, which are fed into the local biomass to energy plant. And finally, as you can tell, I'm a gourmet. I love pâte negra ham, and it comes from that landscape. And what better for pâte negra ham than a beautiful champagne? And the champagne is corked with cork that comes from those trees. Again, it's a traditional system, it's a highly productive one, and it's a highly income-generating one. Now, why? Why around the world do farmers, rich farmers, poor farmers, dry farmers, wet farmers, humid farmers, etc., why? Well, it's obvious once you start thinking about it. Trees are bigger than crops. Duh. That means they have roots that go way down below the crop roots, and they pump up the nutrients and the water, which then fall back onto the soil surface through the leaf fall, where the leaves rot and the nutrients become available to the crop. It's like having a fertilizer factory in your field. Water. Trees are giant rain-catching devices. The water runs along the branches and the trunk and the roots, And because the roots open up the soil structure, far more water percolates into the soil, and it sits there, and it becomes available to your crops in case of drought. It uses more sunlight. Sometimes experiments take a long time. This one took 40 years. Over 40 years, a bunch of French scientists measured every year how much sunlight was used by the wheat field on the left, how much sunlight was used by the freshly planted walnut forest in the middle, and how much sunlight was used by the wheat-walnut agroforestry system on the right. Focus on the black area. The black area represents all of the wasted sunlight. You have the most wasted sunlight over the 40-year period in the wheat system. Normal. Wheat is a winter crop, right? I mean, it's in the summer, your field is bare just when there's a lot of sun. It's a bit wasteful. Your forestry system is wasting a lot of light at the beginning when the trees are small, but as the canopy leaves out and covers the landscape, you find that you use more and more sun. But the best use of sunlight is in the agroforestry system over the 40-year period. But you also notice that suddenly it gets more complicated. A farmer on the left puts in his crop today, gets his harvest a few months down the road, and as long as there is no climate weather catastrophe, and as long as prices don't vary too much, you can predict pretty well what you're going to get, and you can continue doing that for years. In the agroforestry system, over time, as the trees take more and more space, the amount of wheat you're going to get is going to get lower and lower and lower. So you suddenly need to start thinking a little bit like a forester in financial terms as well, and not just in biophysical terms. The crops help the trees. Because crop roots take up all the room near the surface, the tree roots have to go further down before they spread sideways. And that has an immediate benefit. What you see on these charts is the number of tree rootlets by depth. On the left in the forestry system, most of the rootlets are close to the surface. On the right, in the agroforestry system, most of the rootlets are further down. When a drought comes in the forestry system, the tree stops growing. It's stressed because most of its rootlets are affected by water scarcity. In the agroforestry system, the tree goes, ha ha, I don't care, because most of its rootlets are way below the level where water scarcity is a big issue. And that is why in some of these agroforestry systems, when you do the comparison, at the end of the rotation, 40 years down the road, you get as much wood, as much timber from the agroforestry system as you do from the pure forestry system. But of course, you also got all of the crop on top. That's why agroforestry is so powerful. But agroforestry is practically unknown. This is a picture that was taken from the website of one of the big agrochemical input companies. And it's a picture that's designed to suggest successful farming. Once you understand agroforestry, all you see is, right, Europe, June, July, i.e. the time when we have 16 hours of sunlight a day and there's no photosynthesis. Europe, June, July, well, it rains a fair amount in Europe in June, July when we don't have a drought, and there's nothing there to use that water. It's extravagantly wasteful. It's like getting into a Hummer to drive 200 meters to the shop. It's completely ridiculous. At least in this system, photosynthesis is continuing even as you are harvesting your crop. Now, if you remember one thing from my presentation, and one thing only, I want you to remember this, the land equivalency ratio. The land equivalency ratio is simply the amount of cropland as a monocrop and forest land as a monocrop you need to generate the same amount of biomass as a single hectare of agroforestry. And in this hypothetical example, the land equivalency ratio is 1.4, meaning you need 1.4 hectares of monocrop wheat and monocrop forest to generate the same biomass as a hectare of agroforestry. And indeed, that is what is being measured. A lot of this work has been done by Christian Duprat. I have no idea where he disappeared to in France, but he's going to be speaking next, and he's going to give you some actual examples. Land equivalency ratios of 1.4 to 1.6. If you prefer to think in a different way, it simply means 40 to 60% more productivity and potentially 40 to 60% more income simply from mixing things up. Remember that oil palm plantation, that mess? Well, this is the result. Red, monocrop, the neighbors. Green, polycrop, our stuff, it's up to 100% more productive. And that's just the oil. Remember, you also have the coffee, the cacao, and the bananas that you can harvest. People who are using this system are laughing all the way to the bank, even though their labor costs are, of course, much higher because you need to manage it. That's why agroforestry is such a fantastically hot thing. Not only does it generate more food and more money, but it puts carbon where it belongs, into the soil. That's why when I wake up panicking in the middle of the night, I think of trees and I fall asleep again. That's been measured. Now, most of you are agriculturalists, farmers, practitioners, academics. You're not climate scientists. And you don't have the time to start reading all of the climate science. But if there's one thing that you should read, it's called Drawdown. Drawdown.org is the website. And what they did is they simply did a literature review of everything you could do to get that damn carbon back out of the atmosphere and into the soils again. And out of their top 20 solutions, half have to do with the way we use land, and most of those have to do with trees. If you do all that in the way that they have, and they've been conservative in their estimates as you read their references, if you do all that, boom, 33 parts per million out of the atmosphere again. We're at 410 at the moment, give or take. We can get back down to 380. And that's before we start dealing with industry, with construction, or with transport. It's extraordinary. The only thing that's more powerful about that than those tree-based systems is number 6 and 7, I particularly love. If you put them together, it is number 1. It's educating girls and family planning. Because across much of the poor world, girls are oppressed, they don't go to school, they don't get educated, they marry young, and they have far too many kids. And of course, the biggest machine for generating carbon pollution is you and me. Every single human being generates carbon simply by being alive and consuming stuff. So reducing the sheer mass of human beings on this planet is perhaps the only other thing that we can do that has a massive impact. So trees are extraordinary. And how much of a mitigation potential does that make in Europe? Why is that important for the CAP? 1/3 of total emissions. All right, depends on how you make the calculations. Some come to 40%, some come to 20%, but roughly 1/3 of Europe's total emissions could just be sucked away by doing this. All emissions, transport, industry, everything. But farmers don't plant trees because it sucks up carbon. Farmers plant trees because it provides them with resilience. And interestingly enough, work that colleagues of mine at the World Agroforestry Center have done 2 years ago shows that the area of agricultural land around the world with at least 10% tree cover is increasing year after year after year. And you notice it in Africa. In the places where the human population densities are the highest is where you have the most trees and the most agroforestry, because it's the only way of growing enough food to feed all that population. So that's great news as well. It's also great news for the water cycle. Drought is something that happens not only because there's not enough rain falling from the sky, but also because the land is not able to capture that water and put it into the soil. And it turns out, and we've done the work, that there's an optimal tree density for water recharge. If you have a forest, as you have on the right, most of your water evaporates again from the trees. Very little goes into the ground. If you have no trees, as you have on the left, the soil becomes a hard pan. When it rains, the water just runs away. Very little goes into the soil. But when you have the optimal tree density somewhere in between, then you have little runoff, you have little evapotranspiration, you have little soil evaporation, and so you have a lot of groundwater recharge. Agroforestry is not just something that farmers should do. It's not just about farmers adding trees to their fields. It's also something that foresters need to look at. This picture was taken last summer in Portugal. You may remember from the news how bad the fires were in that environment. Almost 100 dead, because the species that were chosen that were planted seemed to have been chosen by an evil devil from hell to be the perfect species to burn as quickly as possible once the fire starts. People simply couldn't drive quickly enough to get out of it. The fire was faster than a speeding car. There were also fires in this environment. You didn't see them in the news. Why? It's a grass fire. That's it. Yeah, the grass suffers. If the animals have not been taken away, the animals suffer. But the trees don't suffer. Cork oaks have thick bark to protect themselves from fire. The fire doesn't spread. The fire doesn't kill. The fire doesn't destroy. Likewise, plantation forestry is fragile when the weather goes to pot. Here was a natural experiment, and God sometimes sends us natural experiments that happen in the southwest of France, a place where, as it happens, a lot of agroforestry is getting done. In 2009, this massive storm called Klaus raged through that area with extremely high winds. The forests, after that storm went through, looked like this. It's just good for firewood. And there's an awful lot of firewood lying on the ground, and only so much material and labor to collect it all before it starts rotting. So much of it does not even get collected at all. It's a net loss for the forester. This was also in the path of Klaus. It's an agroforestry system, and it's an agroforestry system the summer afterwards. It's fine. The trees did not suffer because their roots are deeper, and they're stockier. You can tell they're stocky trees compared to these trees, which are tall and thin. They resist wind shear much, much better. And of course, even if some trees had been felled, yeah, it's bad, but you still have the crop. The crop is fine. And that's why farmers are adding so many trees to their system. Adaptation. Because when the sun shines like here, this picture was taken in Mali, you get nothing. You've worked hard because all this was done by hand. No machinery, no animals. It's people digging holes and planting seeds by hand. All that work was done for nothing. In Europe, where we're rich and we have machinery, we see our soil blow away. But once we start putting systems down and we go back to the wisdom of our ancestors, like this picture taken in France at the turn of the last century, we notice that there are solutions. These things work. There's a reason why Europe became the most powerful continent on Earth in the 19th century. It's not just the technology that allowed us to build bigger ships and bigger guns and to have nastier microbes to kill everybody else on this planet. It's also because we knew how to grow more food for a very high population density to generate the workers and the soldiers and everybody else that European expansion required. And that food was grown in that kind of landscape. It wasn't grown with fossil fuels. It wasn't grown with inorganic fertilizers. It wasn't grown with pesticides. It was grown with something much more powerful than that. The human brain. That's why this is a picture that soon should disappear from the collective conscious. Because once you start replacing your farmland, your individual large monocrop fields, by something where you think a little bit more, where you add trees and animals to your crops, you start seeing the money rolling in and the erosion going down. Sadly, though, on this planet, decisions tend to be taken by educated people in suits who live in cities. And educated people in suits who live in cities totally understand that it takes thousands of companies and hundreds of thousands of workers to make something as complex as a mobile phone. But they completely misunderstand farming. They think that simplicity is a solution. And so, for example, in the global effort to restore landscapes, almost half of the projects that bureaucrats in ministries around the world have filed with the system to say we're restoring land are monocrop plantations of trees. That is an absolute disaster. Not only is it bad for biodiversity, it's even bad for the climate, because turning a natural forest into a plantation puts a huge amount of carbon in the atmosphere, and your plantation's never going to get it back. And research that was published just a couple of weeks ago in Nature shows that a natural forest has 40 times more carbon than a plantation, and an agroforest, the kind of thing that you can all do, has 7 times more carbon in it than a plantation. So yet another reason to add trees to the systems. Because without trees, your yields go down, your resilience goes down, your soil carbon goes away. With trees, your yields go up, your resilience goes up, and your soil carbon goes back into the soil. And the beautiful thing is, it requires cleverness. It doesn't even sometimes require trees. Here are 2 ranches run by commercial ranchers in South Africa. On the left is a rancher who's mob grazing his animals. On the right is a rancher who is doing the recommended thing. And the recommended thing is set stocking, i.e. let the animals wander wherever they like. Guess who's making more money? Just an example of what the land equivalency ratio can be in practice. This is a farm in the UK. Jo knows it well. She'll be speaking a little bit later. So these guys are making about 1.43, 43% more income simply by mixing their coppicing and their wheat. So don't be like this banker. Don't think that the solution lies in simplicity. Embrace complexity. Because the present is win-lose. Lots of inputs, and the only thing you get out of it is food. The future can be win-win. Fewer inputs, more productivity. Because unlike with Brexit, with agroforestry, you can have your cake and eat it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for a very nice and I hope also convincing presentation. And I still think that if there are some one or two soaring questions, it would be nice to add them.
Thanks, Patrick. Fantastic and very convincing presentation. And thank you for coming, sharing and networking, because we as a practicing agroforestry, we know many of those things. But to share with others, I would like to ask you a specific question, also at a specific time, very symbolic, Easter. In Christian, even pre-Christian religion, there is a lot of the nature symbolism, and the trees, of course. And Easter Monday is also Earth Day, so it's very symbolic. So can you express what agroforestry means and all those impacts in one single word?
Salvation.
Okay, is there one more question? Okay, I don't see anything. So we will have a time probably in the end of the conference.
Let me ask a question. All those of you who have already added trees to their land, please raise your hand. All right, thank you. All those of you who are farmers but have not yet added trees, please raise your hands. 3, 4. Those, so very small numbers. So we're talking mostly to the converted and the committed. My question now is to the farmers who have not yet added trees. I want you to listen carefully to everything you hear today, and then at the end of the day, come up to me and tell me privately whether you are going to add some trees to your system or whether you're not convinced. Thank you.
Okay, and we go for the next speaker. The next speaker is Christian Dupras. I will introduce him very shortly. Christian Dupras is a designer and manager of the Restanclier agroforestry platform, where there is 45 hectares of agroforestry experiment and demonstration that were established already in 1995. And actually, Restanclier is the oldest agroforestry experiment in Europe with the continuous monitoring and science since plantation. And of course, you have seen some of the results also in Patrick's presentation. He's a director of research at INRA, which is a French National Institute for Agronomical Research. He's an expert on agroforestry and agrivoltaism. You can probably explain later. I didn't know what is that, but I know now. He's associate editor, of course, of the Agroforestry System Journal, elected member of Octane Parliament. However, very important, he's a founding president of French Agroforestry Association, but of course of European Agroforestry Federation, and he was a former president. He's agroforestry expert for the French government, and he's also a chair of scientific committee of the 4th World Agroforestry Congress that will be held in Montpellier in May this year. So probably some of you will also be there. Okay, the floor is yours.
Can you put the slides? Thank you, Bohdan. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it's my pleasure to be here and talk about agroforestry, the way we researched that during the last 30 years in France, Europe, and the world. So I will give you some ideas about what has been achieved regarding agroforestry during the last 30 years, more or less. And I will give a focus on climate change, adaptation, and mitigation, as it's quite on the top of the problems at the moment. So I need to, okay. So what I would say first is that we start from that, which is the problem that the paradigm of agriculture in the temperate world, in the developed world, was to separate things. We have the forest on one side, we have the agricultural fields on the other. We may have energy fields, photovoltaic plant, for example, plants on the other way. So everything is separated in space, and everything is, I would say, intensified, but in a single place. So that the goal for every farmer during the last 50 years was to achieve this, something clean, something beautiful in his mind, in our collective mind, which is, in fact, a desert. Let's see about that. So, could we bring trees back in the system is really the question. Is it, because we all come from the forest, we all come from a treed landscape. All the fertility of the European soils, the European agricultural soils, come from the forest that was there before. All the organic matter that we have in our agricultural soils comes from the forest. It's an heritage from the forest. So the idea that we explored during the last 30 years was why not to mix? Why have this segregated, intensified system that look like deserts? So, in fact, we are going back to old times. In old times, there were mixtures everywhere, even in Europe, even in the fields of my grandfather in the Alp mountains in France. There were trees, pastures, crops, animals, everywhere mixed. But since the 1950s, we simplified everything because of mechanization, because of intensification with fertilizers, because all these tools that we have to protect the crops by artificial ways, and we forgot about the complexity of the former systems. And now, could we use this complexity again to get better results? So what if we mix? If we mix crop, animal, and trees, we call that agroforestry. If we mix crops, animals, and photovoltaic panels, I call that agrivoltaism. And I will show you some slides about that. So these are two examples. The first one, you have seen it already. So on the left, it's agroforestry. It's a plot that I planted in the 1990s in the south of France. There are poplars and wheat, barley, peas, and so on. On the right side, you have an agrivoltaic plant, which is photovoltaic panels and crops below the photovoltaic panels. It's the same idea, to have something that better uses the natural resources, sunlight in that example. So the agroforestry systems, these are the kind of experiments that we had for the last decades. And agrivoltaic system, we had also these kind of experiments. On that example, you have fixed panels. The photovoltaic panels don't move. And so they cast a shade on the crops. And the shade, you can't manage it. It's imposed by the system. But now we work on much more clever systems where the panels are moving. They are trackers. They follow the sun. And this offers us the possibility to give the full light to the crop when the crop needs really light. Because when the crop needs a lot of light, we align the panels on the sun, and there is no shade below. So these are the modern agrivoltaic system that we are working now. Now, when you go to agroforestry, we have several options for systems. We have the silvo-arable, trees and crops. We have the silvo-pastoral, trees and animals. We have the home gardens, where everything is mixed close to the house to produce more. We have the linear systems, hedges, riparian hedge along the rivers. And we have forest farming, growing crops into the forest. Okay. So what we have in Europe is that we have a huge potential for agroforestry. We have only 15 million hectares of silvopasture in Europe at the moment, mostly in Spain, Portugal, and some southern countries. And we have only 300 hectares of silvo-arable system in Europe at the moment, which is less than 1% of the cropland of Europe. So what did we learn during the last years? We learned a lot of things, and those are the main topics that I will address now. We learned that we could increase productivity. We learned that we can adapt to climate change. We learned that we can mitigate climate change by sequestering carbon in the soil with the system. We learned that we can foster biodiversity in the system. We learned that we can protect water resources and soils. And we learned that we can alleviate some risk like fires, floods, and droughts. So let's go to that. The first point, and it was very important because my parents were farmers, and when I started the experiments in the 90s, foresters say, you can't plant trees in cropland. Trees will not grow. They will be destroyed by the tractors, they will be destroyed by the herbicides, and they will not grow like in a forest. And farmers said, you can't plant trees in my cropland. I can't work with them. There will be, it's a problem with the machinery. I don't know how to manage those trees. They will cast shade on the crop, and the crop will not produce, and so on. So the most important question that we addressed is, can we make money with agroforestry? That was the first question by farmers. And the answer is yes. And that's what I will try to show you now. So these are the kind of plots that we have been monitoring for the last years. And now the trees are mature, they are big, they are tall, they are really competitive with the crops. So we can address all those questions. Can we make money with this kind of system? And that's what we are discussing now. Look at that picture. It's a traditional orchard, grove of walnut trees in the Alps, in the French Alps. Those trees are producing nuts, of course. They are fruit trees, but you have about 100 trees per hectare. They are grafted at 2.5 meter elevation. Okay, so there is a trunk, and this trunk has a high value as timber. It's walnut tree. Usually, in that area, they sell the trunk about 1,000 euro per tree, more or less. If you have 100 trees per hectare, it's 100,000 euros per hectare. And you get those trees in about 50 years. If you do the calculation, it's the return by the tree, only for the timber of the trunks, is about twice or 3 times the return by the crop that you could have on that land. So it means that those trees, they can provide benefits, we'll discuss that later, but they can provide also an income. The only trouble is that income is delayed in time. So the most difficult issue to solve is how to start planting trees and wait for the first harvest or the first production of the trees. If the trees produce fruits, you get incomes very rapidly. If they produce only timber, you get income much later. So the first question that people ask is really, can we make money with that? We have examples of traditional systems where people did make money. And I should say that I inherited a farm from my grandfathers, and there are pear trees on the farm, and when I sell a pear tree, I'm happy. It has a lot of value. So the other aspects are all the environmental services of agroforestry. When you use agroforestry, you are landscaping your place, you know? And when you use this image to sell your products to consumers, you are really honest. You sell products with a true image. Very often, agricultural products are sold with a false image. People lie. You don't know how, you know the camembert. Camembert is a French cheese made by milk, cow milk. And on the camembert boxes, you have always a cow under a tree. But most of the cows that produce the milk for the camembert, they never see a tree in their life. So when you do agroforestry, you are honest. You do what you say when you sell your product. So you can use that image. Adaptation to climate change. You know that this is an example of animals looking for shade because they lose a lot of energy when they are in harsh environments. And this is an example of cows. You see, each cow looks for her tree. And here we learned a lot. For example, for farmers, for cow breeders, very often if you ask them, do you like trees in your paddocks, in your pasture? They say, no, no. Why? Because I have one tree, a big tree there, and all the flock is under that tree, and the soil is destroyed by tramping, and the animals are all together, and if they have diseases, they give the disease to the next animal and so on. So if you have one tree in a paddock, yes, it's a disaster. But if you have 100 trees, each cow has her tree. And it makes things totally different. So it's a question of scale, and it's a question of management. And so we also work on adaptation to climate change for crops. And you know that we fear a lot of things about climate change, but one of the big questions is how can we manage excessive heat in spring? That's the major problem with annual crops in Europe at the moment. If you have heat stress at flowering time, let's say in April, in May, you may have a decrease in so can we help that with the trees? That's a question that we address in the research. Just a comment. The tents that you have here are in Restanclière, our farm, experimental farm, and we reduce the amount of rain on some subplots of the experiment to see if the crop will behave better with the help of the tree or not. So that's an experiment running at the moment, and if you come to the conference next May in Montpellier, you will visit that experiment. Okay, so we know that the risks are increasing. Those are the statistics worldwide of fires, floods, and droughts during the last 20 years, and you see the trend. The trend is really panicking. So we have a lot of problems in southern part of Europe, at least, with floods and heavy floods due to heavy storms that come from the Mediterranean Sea. This is an example. During that storm, we had 800 millimeters in 20 hours, which is huge. We had 60 people killed by the flood, and we knew that if we had an agroforestry landscape, the flood peak would have been reduced a lot because infiltration is better, but in that case, infiltration is not the case. The case is that we need to keep water upstream for more time. And if you have hedges, if you have trees, if you have reliefs in the landscape, you keep the water longer, and the peak of the flood downstream is less. So this is very important to have trees in the landscape to do that. What about carbon sequestration? Agroforestry is one of the most efficient strategies to sequester additional carbon into agriculture. There is a strong debate at the moment to know if the forest can store really carbon more than they do actually. And the question was at the center of the recent forest congresses all over the world. And the question and the result is more and more concerning because it seems that the the forest can't store much more carbon. They are just rising their saturation. But when you change the land use from agriculture to agroforestry, then you store a lot of carbon more. So the target is huge, and we could work more on that. So this is examples of systems where you have trees and crops. And also, this is an example from Southern Europe again, but you see the impact of the trees on the pasture. Greener pasture, for a longer time into the summer, which is an important aspect of microclimate modification with the trees. Protection against fire hazards. Since I have been working on agroforestry, I've been planting, I don't know, thousands of hectares. Not a single hectare has burned so far. In my region, in the south of France, 90% of the forest plantation have burned during the same time. So protection against fire hazard is really interesting with this kind of system. Protection of water and soils, Patrick has mentioned that, but I would give you another point on that. When you have rain, after the harvest of the crops, you have nitrate going down and escaping the root zone of the crops. If you have no trees, that nitrate will end in the water tables, in the rivers, and that could be prevented by the trees, because trees have deeper roots and they can capture the nitrate in the depths and avoid the lixiviation, the leaching to the water table. And we have results on that prove that it could be very effective. Biodiversity. A lot of studies about diversity. In the next coming Congress on agroforestry, we have 200 scientific communication on biodiversity in agroforestry systems, concerning a lot of different animals, plants, microorganisms, and so on. And the map at the center here is a map of what we call the fragmentation, in French, we say the green, comment on dit la trame verte en anglais? It's the continuity of natural elements in the landscape that allows wild animals and plants to move into the landscape. And when it's red on that map, it means that there is no room for nature in the agricultural plots. And that's a big problem that agroforestry can solve. So all those species are really favored by agroforestry systems, and they can be very useful for the farmers. I give a simple example about bats. Bats are considered at the moment as one of the best help for vineyard farmers in France to combat le ver de la grappe. I don't know in English the name of that small insect that is really destroying the vineyards. Very often I got a question about, can we reduce the use of pesticides when we do agroforestry? I must say that it's not that easy. It's not that easy. It's not the solution to everything, okay? In some cases, we show that yes. In some cases, no. And we need much more research about that. It's not as simple as that. So it's under study. And about the use of fertilizers, it's not, again, I would not be honest if I tell you that with the trees you will fertilize your crops. No. It's only part of the idea. It's part of the system. It's part of the... reducing the leaching of nitrate is part of the answer. If you use better your fertilizer in agroforestry, that's also a good answer. It's not that you don't need fertilizer anymore. So agroforest trees on fields make things complicated, okay? But if you program that, if you organize that, if you plan that, if you plant the trees, you can get it better. And usually with mechanization, we need trees in lines. So the central question that we addressed as a researcher was, do we need to mix or not to mix trees and crops? And this is a very common example in France, poplars and maize. Poplars and maize were grown together traditionally, at least for the 5 to 6 first years. And then the trees get bigger and they were different. But so and those are all these kind of traditional systems that we had, that we monitored and that we explored, including such as fruit trees and vegetables like this in south of France. So are we back to the future doing planting trees in our big, large fields? We measured that in our experiments. This is in Restainquilière. We had a lot of experiments, and some of those are from China. In China, they have a lot of agroforestry systems. And here, all those are from France, from close to Montpellier, where we do our experiments. And this one is an old one. We have seen the picture on the right with Patrick. It's a farmer who did agroforestry 40 years ago. So it's very interesting to monitor his plots because they are very old now. So to mix or not to mix, we did experiments and we measured since tree planting until tree harvest the productivity of the trees, productivity of the crops. And that's where we got, so that's the experiment, the picture you have seen, until the tree harvest in 2010. And that's where we got that land equivalent ratio that Patrick told you a few minutes ago. And the values depend on the tree species. With poplars, it's between 1.2 and 1.4, while the average was 1.36, depending on the poplar clone and so on. With walnut, it was higher, 1.4 to 1.6. And with agrivoltaic system, it's even higher, 1.3 to 1.7. Very good cooperation between the panels and the crops. But what does that figure means? If you have a 1.4 land equivalent ratio, it means that if you have a 100-hectare farm, on your 100-hectare farm, with agroforestry, you produce as much tree product and crop product as if you had a 140-hectare farm, which is a big intensification, a large intensification. So the interpretation, it was already said, you better use the light of the sun. We have seen that. You have tree roots and crop roots that are in different layers of the soil, so they use better the soil, they better the nitrogen, better the water. You have those root system, Patrick showed you that, and we have demonstrated that the trees adapt to the crop. It's mostly the trees that adapt to the crop, not the crop to the trees, but mostly the trees, and the tree root system adapt to the crop, being deeper and more efficient. And when you have a deeper tree root system, the tree productivity is increased because the tree suffers less from drought in the summer, and which this has a positive forward effect on the tree. Few words to close the discussion with carbon sequestration. We have measured carbon sequestration. It's easy to measure it in the tree biomass, above ground biomass and below ground biomass, by root sampling, not so easy. But the big question is about the carbon in the soil. Do we really add carbon in the soil with trees? And the answer is not that easy. On sandy soils, it's very difficult, even with trees, to increase the carbon content of the soil. On clayish soils, it's easier. So it depends really on the context. And we have been documenting all the fine root dynamics of the trees in the depths, and we have been discovering something very strange. When you have walnut trees have no leaves during the winter, but they still grow roots during the winter. But they grow roots in deeper horizons where the temperature is above 10 degrees. So that means that even in winter, you have root activity by the trees, carbon injection in deep layers of the soil by the trees. And all those phenomena have to be explored more and better understood. So that's why we have done a lot of PhD studies about carbon sequestration in our agroforestry fields. And the answer is yes. And we have been exploring that in different places of France with different fields. And the answer is yes, agroforestry could be one of the best ways to sequester carbon in soils. So I don't elaborate, I don't have time on that, but those are all the possibilities to use to reduce the carbon emission to the atmosphere, and agroforestry and one of the best solutions at the moment. Adaptation. So I would say, how much time do I have? Finished? 5 minutes? It's okay? Okay. So, adaptation to climate change. For animals, it's clear. Now we have a big experiments with milking cows, with sheep, to measure the increase in productivity of the animals when they are protected by trees in the field. So that's very, very important. So you have seen that. But what about crops? For crops, farmers fear a lot of the competition for light, of course. And what we have been doing, because it's very difficult, we do computer experiments. We plant trees in the computer with crops. We simulate the system for years with different climate scenarios. And with that, we can answer some questions, some interesting questions, or at least have some clues about what could happen. What's the problem for European farmers since about 15 years? It's the yields that are stagnating. We don't improve the yields for crop, for wheat, for maize in Europe and United States. That's the same. Since about 15 years now, we have a stagnation. And this stagnation, I don't have time to elaborate on that, but the main reason, there are two main reasons. A lesser quantity of nitrogen applied by farmers, because nitrogen is expensive. That explains about 20% of the stagnation, but the other 80% of the stagnation is explained only by climate change. We have repeated problems with flowering, with grain filling, due to unexpected events of heat stress, water stress, and so on. And this could be really the main problem of European farmers during the next 50 years. So we work with farmers, and farmers, those are the farmers we work with in Restanclière, and they say that when we have dry periods at the wrong time for the cereals, when you have trees in the field, things are better. It's only a saying of the farmer. We try as researchers to measure that, but it's difficult. So I don't have an answer today, but we are working on that. And that could be a very important aspect. And the models show us that on the long term, with climate change hypotheses as we have now, having trees in the fields could reduce the variability of the yields from one year to the other. Without trees, you would have very different, very good years and very poor years. With trees, you would have more an average response, which would be good. Ça marche plus. Okay. So at the moment, for the research to face climate change with annual crops in Europe, for winter crops, we could have shorter cycle varieties to avoid the effect of the early drought that are coming, or long cycle varieties, more productive, in agroforestry systems. That are the options that are explored at the moment. Bon, je vais faire là. Okay. And also, there is an impact of the shade, of the quality of the production. And this is an example in an agrivoltaic system. We measured the protein content of the grain of wheat under the shade of the agrivoltaic and in the full sun. And the protein content was really increased in the shade because the translocation from the plant to the grain was better when it's slower, because in the shade, grain filling duration is longer. So that's an interesting aspect. As a conclusion, okay, it's complex, but it's efficient and it's beautiful sometimes. So to convince farmers, what we have seen in the past years is that you have to explain that agroforestry is not forestry, it's agriculture. It's a way to do agriculture. And that trees and farms are capital assets. You have a tractor and you have trees to produce. So that's a different aspect. And if it's a capital asset, you have no taxes on it, which makes a difference. So agroforestry should be considered agriculture. What made the decision efficient? You need demonstration plots. Farmers believe what they see. They don't believe what you say. So most farmers who planted agroforestry have visited first a farm that works. So you should avoid disasters. You should avoid mistakes. When you do a plantation and those trees don't grow, it does harm. So it's really you should be careful about planting the right tree in the right place. And then we have been lobbying, because trees don't demonstrate on the streets, so you have to do lobbying. That's not so easy. And the concerns about the environment help a lot at the moment. So French farmers and farmers' unions in France are more and more open to agroforestry. The key information is that the short-term income is maintained, because the crop productivity is about the same when the trees are small. So in the close future after tree plantation, you still have the same income. You just lose the strip at the bottom of the tree, which is 3%, 5% of the land. So that's very important aspect. And then you have the long-term capital stacking with trees that could be attractive in the uncertain future that we have. And what is essential for dissemination is that we should have no negative impact on the common agricultural policy payments. That was why most agroforestry systems were cancelled, were destroyed by farmers during the 90s, because when you had trees on your farm, you had no payments from the European Union. So this is solved today. It should be compatible with crop mechanization. You should have some empathy from extension officers and agricultural services, and you should have technical recommendation. So it's a European move. It's slow, of course. Trees grow slowly, but once you start it, it could be effective and long term. So it could be. We had the green evolution, the green evolution due to new varieties, due to fertilizers. This could be not a revolution, because it will be slow. A revolution is fast, it's brutal. No, it could be an evolution for a very green landscape. And I invite you all, but maybe it's late to register, to the next Congress in Montpellier. We'll have more than 1,000 communication on scientific aspect of agroforestry, so I could not give you all these aspects today. And the motto of the Congress is "Make our planet treed again." Thank you very much. This final picture is symbolic. It's from Turkey. It's the Anatolian Plateau. And there was a say in Turkish that said that a monkey could go from Ankara to the Red Sea without putting a feet on the ground, because there were trees everywhere. Today it's totally impossible. That's the best you can find. So there is room for agroforestry everywhere in Europe at the moment. Thank you very much.
Now, all of you have been sitting down for almost 2 hours. Your butt hurts. And we've been talking about trees. So I'd like you all to stand up, please. Put your computers and your bags down, phones in your pockets. Stand up and close your eyes. Close your eyes. Close your eyes. You are a tree. Your arms are the branches of the tree, and the branches are rising towards the sun. Rising towards the sun. And now the wind is coming. The wind is moving the branches around. And you're moving around, and the wind is getting stronger and stronger. It's pushing you around from front to back and from side to side. And finally the wind goes away and you can sit down again.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for a nice exercise. Thanks a lot, Christian, for interesting presentation. We are very glad that Christian find the time to come here because he's really busy with preparing everything in a few weeks in Montpellier. But thank you very much, Christian. If there is any question to Christian, yeah, there are a few. So there.
Martina Pásková, Environment Commission of Academy of Science. I just wonder if you tried, or somebody from your team, try to count how this use of agroforestry system improve the ecosystem services in comparison with the traditional forestry or traditional agriculture. Thanks.
Short question, long answer. No, yeah, Nico. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So your question is about ecosystem services, appraisal, but there are so many different ones and so many conflicting servicing together that I can't give you an answer, a global answer on that. In some cases, we had some negative impacts of trees and crops. Don't be, no, it's not that easy. So most of our research is to integrate the positive impact, which we call facilitation, and the negative impacts, which are competition or different aspects of competition. But if you think about the landscape, just landscape, people thinking about you as a farmer taking care of the landscape, this is a very positive aspect for farmers. So how can you measure that? So we don't have an answer for a global answer on ecosystem services of agroforestry systems. It's very, each system needs to be analyzed. And I'm very, very reluctant to give recipes, you know. There is no universal recipe about planting trees in a farm. No, everything should be adapted to your local condition, your local soils, your local tree species, and your crops. So your question is very difficult to answer.
I mean, individual ecosystem services. You try to compare individual ecosystem services. I mean, if you try to count the individual ecosystem services, some selected ecosystem services, and to compare if the using of agroforestry is improving these individual ecosystem services in comparison with the traditional forestry or agriculture.
There's two ways in which we can answer your question. The first is directly to say yes. Work has been done to measure ecosystem services, so we know, for example, what water infiltration into groundwater infiltration rates are, why they are optimal tree densities. We know what happens to biodiversity in particular systems. But the more interesting answer is the one that Christian gave, which is beware. Because whenever you're measuring something like that, you're only measuring one system, one particular crop with one particular tree type managed in one particular way. And you will have an answer that's valid for that system. But if the neighbor is using a different crop, a different tree, and managing them in a different way, then that information is going to be anecdotal. It's not going to be helpful. There's a second reason why we have to be aware of that question, which is that, as I hoped I showed in my presentation, when you do agroforestry, everything changes. Your soil carbon changes, your water infiltration changes, your pest load changes, your helpful allies load changes, your drought resistance changes, your storm resistance changes, your income pattern changes, your risk changes, your insurance system changes, everything changes. So you have to think in systems terms. In traditional science, we try to eliminate every variable so that we can look at one variable and see what happens to that one variable. Well, that's great for physics, but it's lousy for landscapes.
Okay, one more question.
I will ask in Czech, please, because it's not easy questions. Některé stromy se nemají rádi vzájemně ani s ostatní vegetací. Často vlastně produkují toxické látky pro ty druhé, pro ty ostatní, aby bojovali o místo a o prostor. Je to přirozené. Chtěl jsem se zeptat, zdali chystáte z vědeckého hlediska jakýsi katalog těch, co se mají vzájemně rádi, to znamená neškodí si, to znamená třeba třešně s ječmenem nebo hrušně s pšenicí a zase naopak takový hrubý katalog, co k čemu nejde. Kdysi v historii si toho lidé všímali a znali to z tradice. Ta tradice v našich zeměpisných šířkách se vytratila, ale teď by byla výborná příležitost pro vědu podívat se na ty látky třeba pomocí hmotnostních spektrometrů, co k čemu jde, co k čemu ne a zkusit něco takového praktického pro běžného zemědělce, srozumitelného, aby mohl používat nejen v tropech, ale i v našich zeměpisných šířkách. Děkuju.
Thank you. Yes, that's a good point. There are some toxic products that we call that allelopathy. Allelopathy is the way that some species protect themselves by killing or preventing others to grow around by producing some products, chemical products. I would say one of the best known allelopathy is with walnut. Walnut trees, usually farmers or my family said, oh no, nothing grows under a walnut tree. Okay? When I have that answer, I say, okay, try to destroy the roots of the tree, of the walnut tree, just by plowing and grow something, and everything grows then. So, allelopathy by walnut was very well studied, mostly in the United States, because they have very old groves of walnut trees. And it appears that you need such high content of juglone, juglone is the name of the compound, to prevent other species to grow, that it never occurs in nature. And when you grow only 100 trees per hectare, that's really not a problem. I have not seen any problem with walnut trees and our annual crops so far, and so I would say that this is overemphasized. There is not so much allelopathy typical. There is one with one Pinus species in our experiments. Pinus, I don't remember that name, it's a Pinus from the Middle East that really kills the crops. One species. We have explored more than 50 different species. So I don't think there are so many problems with that. I think you can marry trees and crops more or less as you want, unless you put too many trees. Okay, if you have 50 trees per hectare, 100 trees per hectare, everything is possible. If you plant 400 trees, 800 trees, that's much different. So agroforestry is few trees with crops. It's not a forest with crops. It's quite different. So you're right that there was a lot of traditional knowledge about how to grow trees, things together, but it was from a period when you had no mechanization. I think mechanization changes everything. So we have to do that again, but I have no example. Maybe my colleagues will give examples different, but I have no examples of a tree that is incompatible with a crop so far, except that Pinus species.
Okay. Okay, last question, if it will be fast, because we are running a little bit out of the time.
Thank you for lecture. My question is quite similar to the previous one, but would you maybe have some positive examples? Because you talked about how it can maybe you could maybe reduce the use of pesticides and fertilizers. Out of your head, maybe, or maybe you can point us to somewhere else. Are there some good examples of combinations that actually prevent you? I mean, they take the role of the fertilizers for the crops, or the role of the pesticides? Some good examples that
no. To my knowledge, no. You have, of course, a lot of agroforestry systems where you grow nitrogen-fixing trees to produce, to fix nitrogen and to put that nitrogen to the crops. So that was most developed in Africa, in tropical countries. In Europe, we are doing some experiments with Robinia pseudoacacia, the black locust, to use the Robinia as the fertilizer for the crops. But those experimental plots are only 3 years old, so we need to wait for that. But I would not say that will be enough to fertilize the crop in the long term. It's more a holistic approach. You will improve slowly the soil. When you improve the soil organic matter, you improve the nutrient retention and so on. So it's bringing the soil to a better functioning, but I think my colleagues will elaborate on that later.
And as you pointed out, in the tropical world, there's many examples. All these fertilizer trees that allow people to grow cereals is an obvious one, but a less obvious one is, you may remember the picture I showed from Uganda. You had the word vanilla in there. The vanilla farmers are planting jatropha trees and then pruning the trees back extremely severely and planting the vanilla, which is a vine, that grows around the jatropha. Nobody taught them how to do this, and when you ask the farmers why they do this, they say, well, the vanilla loves the jatropha. It grows faster and it's not attacked by pests. So you have examples like that, and often they come from the trial and error of individual farmers in individual fields.
One experience from some work we've been doing in the UK is in the relation to increased mycorrhizal populations in the soil, which enhance nutrient uptake, especially phosphate. Where we've got agroforestry systems, the stable perennial, the tree component, you've got a bigger population of stable mycorrhizae around those tree roots than you would in a monocultural cultivated situation. So soils enhance more rapidly under an agroforestry situation in terms of mycorrhizae.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to stop now the discussion. We will have a time in the afternoon also, because we are running a little bit out of time. So I would like to invite Fabien Balaguer to the floor. I will introduce him. Fabien graduated from France as an agronomist and holds MSc in agroforestry from Bangor University in the UK. His MSc was already connected with World Agroforestry Center, and he worked in his diploma thesis in Ethiopia. Then he stayed for several years in Africa, and he worked as a project officer for agroforestry development projects, primarily in Senegal, Burkina Faso, and Ethiopia. But currently now he serves as a director of French agroforestry associations, and of course he is a member of the European Agroforestry Federation. So the floor is yours, Fabien.
Thank you, Boden. Is it working? Can you hear me? Okay. So I'm relieved because Patrick has already waken you up. I thought it would be my job to make you patient enough before lunch. Well, I hope you'll be patient enough still. So I've prepared quite a broad presentation. I'll go quick at the beginning because my introduction it has been said already, most of it. But my point also is to give you concrete example of how to develop agroforestry in the field, from the farm to the landscape level, and of course from local to national. So I've selected this picture as a beginning because it's taken, let's say, close to here it's across the border of, okay, yeah, it's across the border of Austria and Czech Republic. And we've been talking a lot about landscape since this morning, and I want to point out that landscape is not only about postcards, it's the result of something. It means a lot of the practices that are behind that. The difference between those two situations is not about soil, it's not about climate, it's about practices, maybe a little bit of history and policy and that kind of things as well. But, you know, in both cases, yeah, there is a lot of reasons for this to happen in one same context. So this is what you can see quite often in the south of France. Of course, it's quite extreme here. But yeah, you can see a few trees and you have a very poor soil. You can see the light color. And of course, a lot of drought over the summer. And this is not agroforestry, of course. My definition of agroforestry, when I try to make it short, is a fertile soil in a fertile landscape. In this situation, we have a lot of work to do, of course. The carbon cycle is almost non-existing, whereas we are always talking about carbon every day more and more. And even if you were growing organic or going into organic, it wouldn't solve anything. Okay, so it's a bigger challenge that we have to take up. Patrick has shown this picture already. So when the water comes, it goes from drought to flooding, basically, and it's degrading the soil. And I want to point out here about the cost of repairing, cleaning the water, cleaning the ditches, the roads, etc., for society. It has been estimated to 200 euros per inhabitant in the southwest of France. It's really a lot. So when we say agroforestry costs a lot to implement, just take at the whole picture and you will see it's a cheap solution and efficient, economically speaking, not only for farmers but also for society. So yeah, this is the result. You're basically degrading your production tool, your first production tool, which is the soil. If you look at science, only about water erosion, I'm not talking about wind erosion and that kind of things, you have 13% of the land area that loses above 5 tons per hectares and per year. So basically you're taking out more soil than wheat in most cases, okay? So that has to be taken into consideration, of course. Wind erosion, we've seen that. And we have those kinds of contexts with rivers almost, we would say, destroy. Yeah, we all know it's bad. We all know this picture is unreal. It should not exist, but it happens. In many cases, it's a lack of communication between people. This river could look like that one. And basically, that riparian buffer that you have here is productive. If you compare it to the small square of forest that you have at the bottom right, it produces 3 to 5 times more per unit of land, okay? Per square meter or per hectare or whatever that it takes of space. So it's a lot more productive. Of course, it depends on management, but it's also because a lot more light is entering into the system because of the linear shape. So agroforestry is all this together. It's not only about planting trees on the field. It's not only about having rows of trees that you can see part of it. Of course, it's probably a small part of the subject, but it's also about reshaping your landscape and having trees on boundaries, on river banks, etc., etc. So it's a landscape challenge. And this is what we're trying to implement on the field, and we've taken a pilot region, which is the southwest of France, together with farmers. So most of the farmers were already let's say, in the transition, and each of them had part of the solution, and the idea was really to compile everything together and have a sustainable soil and water management, because of course those two things are really related. If you don't speak French, but no worries, it's fine, but agro, the EAU means water in French, so it's a plain word between agronomy and water management, being the keystone of everything. The idea was really to produce more with less resources and for a longer time. This project has been established for already 6 years, and I will try to go through some of the results and some of the knowledge that have been taken from the work that was done on the field. So the idea was to gather everyone around farmers, all the landscape users. So you have everything around them, from river conservationists, beekeepers, foresters, of course, and also consumers and citizens. And it is organized around a bunch of partners. This slide is pretty old. Nowadays, we have almost 20 partners implementing the project on the field. But the important thing here is that it's partly funded by the local water agency, that basically decided to put money into preventing instead of trying to repair the consequences after that. So yeah, that's the important message. One of the key starting points was those kinds of situations where, yes, farmers were planting trees, but there was something wrong in between the trees, say it. When we talk about improving photosynthesis, in that kind of situation, it's not working. When we talk about sustainable water management, same problem. And when we talk about storing carbon, again, there is something to be improved. And we had also those kinds of situations with basically quite a few trees actually in the landscape. But on the crop side, it was really challenging most of the time, especially across the summer. So this is sunflower, and it's probably not going anywhere as it stands. So because we are ambitious, we basically wanted to grab all the gray part here, improve the sunlight capture even more. Of course, we've seen that already. It's already good. But all the gray side is still lost. So the idea was to basically fill up the gaps. You have the usual system with a bare soil most half of the year, and then you have maize. You could grow cover crops that you could value as fodder or as mulch for the following crop, for example. But the idea is to have an evergreen agriculture, basically. And agroforestry, as a definition initially, is that kind of multi-layer system that help building an evergreen farming and improve photosynthesis. So this is how it looks. Here's just a roller, so you will roll your cover crop and seed directly into the mulch. This has plenty of interest. It's less costly, and in terms of water management, it's very useful. We will talk about that a bit later. It's improving your soil, of course. Well, this takes a few years, okay? It's not magic. It doesn't happen in a day. And all this was done basically all together with farmers. You know about conservation agriculture. Here we call it the conversation agriculture. Because all this knowledge is being invented or reinvented every day on the field by farmers, with farmers. And it's just about, compiling all the experiences and ideas. It's not in any book for now. It won't probably be in any book, actually. But the idea is to move forward altogether. Another sunflower, but in a not a different context, because it's actually more or less the same soil again, the same climate. The difference here is the practice. And you can see how tall it is. It's not Brazil, it's the southwest of France. And it produces a lot more biomass, of course. Those farmers are not neighbors, but they are really in similar contexts. Of course, there is a big work also on genetics here. If you talk about water management a little bit, this is the soil stability test. And you can see in both cases, in one case you can do proper farming, in the other case you can make coffee maybe, but not much more than that. And you can imagine what happens when the rain comes on one soil or another. And actually, here's an example quite clear of what it could look like. So yeah, one of the key points is really to move from planting trees to agroforestry, meaning a change in agronomy integrating trees. That's important, and that's how farmers will get into it and understand it and, you know, find interest about it. So in order to move on altogether at a landscape level, at a regional level, one of the key things was to establish pilot farms. So there's a bit more than 100 of them now. And they are real farms, basically, doing things, and we're trying to follow up the results, whether successes or failures, of course, and analyze what's happening. So yeah, we have groups of farmers working, some knowledge, some experience is coming up, and then we're trying to, of course, outscale it and widespread the best practices. But everything starts with farmers again. About the results and indicators, we are following two things. One is at the plot scale, so a bunch of soil quality indicators, nitrogen, carbon, soil water infiltration capacity, and the biomass yield, of course, which is the key thing. And we also have indicators at the farm level. This is done using calculation, computers, etc. We work on the economic and social level, and of course on input efficiency, for example, or greenhouse gases. A little bit of the results very quickly. About carbon storage. So basically we have two groups of farms, the top 20 farms of the network and the top 100 farms of the network. So you can clearly see that in both cases it's storing. So those farming systems are becoming carbon sinks, whereas the average farm, it is at the bottom one, the average farm in the same context in southwest of France is actually a carbon source. It's emitting carbon, okay? So it's CO2 equivalent per hectare and per year. About soil fertility and water resource, we work on the treatment frequency index. So basically how many treatments and how much over a year or over a crop. And here you can see also some interesting results being shown. So of course this is not organic yet. Some farmers are going towards organic very, very, very slowly but surely. The main thing is about herbicides. The main thing that we still have to work on it. When we talk about insecticides, fungicides, that kind of things is very dropping down quite quickly and quite easily. Nitrogen leaching, so basically a decrease in leaching, which means an increase in nitrogen storage in the soil. which is quite, it makes sense because of course you have more carbon in the soil, and the more carbon you have, the more water and the more nutrients, including nitrogen. So it means less nitrogen in the water in the end, whether the water table or the rivers, mainly the water tables in this case. Water balance. Everything in farming is about balances. So you have intakes, outtakes, etc., and you want to have the result of that, okay? So we're not saying that trees don't consume water. Of course they do. That they will also increase the water intake into the soil, and at the same time as they consume water, they will produce something, okay, resources. Whereas if you have evaporation, because a bare soil is also consuming a lot of water by evaporation. In this case, it's consuming and it's not producing. It's a loss. It's a total loss. So basically, here we've had a decrease in irrigation need from 30 to 50%, depending again on the management, the context, and how advanced are those farmers. But clearly, with both trees and soil cover, as you've seen, like a mulch that is used to seed the major crop, we really have a much better water balance. About economy, yeah, when you put all this together, you basically have less costs, production costs, because you're not plowing. Plowing, for example, is one of the most costs that you have in establishing a crop. Here you're not plowing anymore, and you're cultivating the soil in a very shallow manner, or even not anymore. It's called direct seeding. So you are really saving a lot of cost. Can you hear me? Yeah, right? Okay. So yeah, you're saving costs, and at the same time, if you're maintaining your yield, or in terms of quantity, quality, etc., then of course you're increasing your profit. And that's what happens in most cases. So another thing that is yet to be assessed are the, let's say, side effects of those kinds of landscapes. Basically, you have more habitats, you have more feed resource also for biodiversity. So stop protecting biodiversity, just produce it. Produce the landscape that will host the biodiversity. And in those cases, for example, some trials that we are setting up right now to make a little bit, to push it a little bit more, are about beekeeping. And the honey production is really increasing, as you can tell, as you can imagine. We have some figures, but not yet very clear. But in many cases, it's increasing, and it's a lot more stable from year to year. Okay. Here I wanted to mention that all this that we have seen for now is not magic. It takes time. It's a transition. And here you can see, I'm sorry it's in French, but just look at the years, at the dates here. It's a transition. It takes 10 to maybe 12, 15 years to reshape all that from the beginning to what we could call an agroforestry farm. But most of these farmers, they keep going always. Like, there's always a margin for more improvements. And none of them would go back towards the former systems that they had. So that's just a path that we all have to do together, and of course the idea is to build networks of farmers so they can go faster and further altogether without taking too much risk. I mean, managing that risk that they are taking. So same goes at the landscape level, of course. And this landscape eventually is a productive landscape, and that's important to tell. We're not planting trees just because we like them. We may like them or not, it depends, but it's a crop. It's a perennial crop, and that's the important thing. And eventually, at the landscape level, if you manage to have together your foresters, your farmers, your river conservationists, your road maintenance officers, and those kinds of people who can manage trees in all the boundaries, in all the places in the landscape that you can put trees quite easily. All those trees can product a lot of resources. And it's with almost no cost sometimes, okay? Because you can plant trees, but you can also regenerate naturally all those trees, and then it's all about management and harvesting, yeah. So we have also projects about all that, trying to set new channels, market channels at the landscape level. Of course, it would be a bit harder to do that only at the farm level. So, yeah, it takes a bit more time. But once you have a network of farmers working together, it's quite straightforward. You have a diversity of products that you probably all know. Trees are very multi-purpose. And, yeah, just to mention that once you have a pilot project in a region, then you can just outscale and upscale. It doesn't mean copy-paste, but you have your, let's say, agronomical approach. You have your methodology also of getting the farmers together and making the whole thing work together. And then it's just about time and workforce and, you know, staff, etc., and partnership, of course, because you go to new places and you shouldn't start from nothing. There are plenty of people already working there, and it's just about gathering them and building a network. So that's what we are in now, and it will take a few years, of course. So if you ever want to visit and see on the field how it's happening and meet the farmers, just please come, give us a call. It's always open. Some pretty famous people have come and visited. You may know this guy, or maybe not, but he was the former French Minister of Agriculture, Stéphane Le Foll, who really pushed forward for agroecology and agroforestry. So yeah, we made a big jump, thanks to him. And he's still working on that. No, he's not dead. So, but one of the things we managed to establish is a national plan for agroforestry. Now I'll go very quickly on that. It's quite straightforward, but it makes it official on the political agenda that agroforestry is a national cause. And so basically the idea was to encourage development and sustainable management of agroforestry at the French level. All this was written, so it's about 40 pages, and you have, I think, an abstract in English that you can find online, or I can share it with you if you like. It was written together with practitioners, researchers, and all the stakeholders. So it's quite coming from the field, which is very interesting, of course, and it's part of the French strategy to meet the United Nations Framework Convention of Climate Change, although Patrick said earlier that it's failing, more or less. But maybe this is not the part that is failing. So very quickly, this national plan has 5 orientations. One is to better understand the diversity of agroforestry systems and really have some references, whether technical or economic. So this means pushing forward research and development and strengthening also the network of pilot farms, because that's where the knowledge is being created initially. The second orientation is to improve the regulation and the legal framework, and also strengthen the financial support for establishing trees on the field. Of course, it's a cost. It's an initial cost for farmers, and it should be shared with society. And also, together with that, developing trainings and advice. Training is really important. It's actually the keystone of agriculture development. It's really a change in practices, a change in mindset, and it's almost a new job for some farmers. So yeah, basically training and teaching is key to that, to achieve that. The fourth orientation is to work on marketing of agroforestry product, so whether wood product or food products. This is on the way also. It's a big work. It will take probably a few years. And the final thing is to disseminate agroforestry internationally. So this is what we are here for, I guess. And yes, as a, let's say, conclusion, agroforestry, when we put all together, can be seen as a food revolution. Of course, we are not producing only food in those systems, and that's important to say also every time. But if you want to make it a societal subject that interests also consumers, basically, if you want to outscale the whole dynamic, talk about food, especially if you're French and if you're in France, talk about food, but I guess in the Czech Republic it will be the same. So we are working nowadays on getting to this new objective. It's on the way. It started 1 year ago. We didn't call it agroforestry label or that whatever, that wouldn't really interest anyone. But it's called For an Agriculture of Life. And yeah, it's interesting because it reaches, we used to reach and to gather quite efficiently all the stakeholders on the field and the technical side, but here we are gathering also the industries, the whatever stakeholders around the agri-food systems, and also, of course, the banks, the self-catering companies, for example, collective catering. So yeah, that's more work for the next few years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fabien. We are running a little bit out of time again. It's time for lunch, but still, if there are 1 or 2 questions, I think we have a time for that. Okay, one there.
Yeah, thank you, Fabien, for this nice presentation. Martina Izotová from Crop Research Institute. I would like to ask you, what is the main barrier in France to develop agroforestry further? Is it the knowledge which is not disseminated well enough among farmers, their conservation, their more conventional approach to farming? Or is it the legal framework and the lack of incentives from the government, let's say, to support the further development? And how would you see the future? How would you overcome it? Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Of course, financial incentives are important, especially at the beginning, because, again, planting trees can be quite costly. But we have some of that already in France, whether from public support or private as well. And I don't think we are really missing that nowadays. And I don't believe in, putting more money to help the transition, at least in this respect. Because basically, if this is efficient, if this is an interesting path, we should go for it without subsidies, basically. So we need a bit of that, but it's not the main lever, I would say. What's missing, to my view, or what we should still work on, is basically what I've shown, getting farmers together and reinventing the practices that are adapted to their own context based on those simple principles, but that are not so simple to really implement in the field and adapt to each climate, soil, etc. So it's really about networking, and together with farmers, of course, all the advisors, researchers, etc. And in this respect, there's a lot of work to be done still. So if we put money, let's put money, I would say, preferably on that, and as I mentioned, also training and teaching. Yeah, that's really the key thing.
Okay, there's one more question there. No.
Děkuji. Ona to nebude otázka, já se možná pokusím odpovědět na jednu věc, která se týká České republiky, protože možná odpoledne už na to nebudu mít takový prostor. Ale navazuje to na tu otázku, která je tady před chvilkou padla, jestli co brání tomu, aby se agroforesty zaváděly ve větší míře do praxe v nových zemích. A mně napadá, když tady sedí pan náměstek a další lidé z Ministerstva zemědělství, taková hříšná myšlenka, protože od příštího roku bude v rámci zásad správné zemědělské praxe povinnost v mírně a silně erozně ohrožených půdních oblastech mít maximální velikost monokultury plodiny 30 hektarů. A už dneska máme v rámci těch pravidel nastavené nějaké podmínky, že buď tam budete mít 22 metrů plodiny, tuším, že to je travina nebo něco, co rozdělí ten velký monokulturní celek, nebo tam budete mít přerušeno jinou plodinou, která má příznivý dopad nebo protierozní dopad o šířce 220 metrů. No a tady se nabízí otázka, proč tam nedat třetí variantu. A tou třetí variantou by zkrátka byla alej nebo stromořadí vysázených agroforestů v rámci toho dělení toho půdního bloku na menší než 30 hektarové monokultury. Samozřejmě dneska máme možnost využít všechny dostupné technologie, jako jsou GPSky, to znamená výsadbu v takových roztečích, které vám zajistí možnost využívat zemědělskou techniku a tak dále, nebudu to rozvíjet, je to prakticky domyslitelná věc. A nepotřebujeme k tomu ani žádné peníze. A to tím neříkám, že bychom nějaký nepotřebovali, ale teď to říkám jako tu motivaci, tu mimofinanční motivaci, kterou můžeme vlastně tím, že se toto zapracuje do řešení problému snižování velikosti monokultur na mírně a silně erozně ohrožených půdách, tak to dát jako jednu alternativu pro zemědělce a samozřejmě zároveň připravit vědecké kapacity, výzkumné ústavy, kontrolní organizace, aby byly připraveny na to, že zemědělci, sedláci budou tímto způsobem třeba tento problém řešit. Tak to je to, co jsem k tomu chtěl jako poznámku. Děkuju.
Okay, it was not really a question, so I don't know if you want someone comment that. Not really. Okay.
Can I just add one thing about one of the questions before? Very quickly, when we talk about agroforestry, we always get those questions about what is the ideal association between a tree and a crop? And of course I understand those questions, but there won't be any answer ever. It's about management. The key thing is about having the right tree in the right place with the right management. The same tree, whether you let it grow or you manage it, and an agroforestry tree has to be managed, otherwise it won't work. So it's about density, as we said, but it's also about how you manage those trees. You have to crop those trees. And that's the key thing. And if you know how to do that, I would say pretty much any tree in any crop could work if you find the balance taking into account that initially there is a competition, of course, and that through management you reach complementarity. But that's a lot of work, that's a lot of knowledge, and this is where we have to put the effort now.
Okay, thanks a lot. If there is no more questions, thank you very much for this morning blog. Přijdu do češtiny. Děkuji moc za toto dopoledne. Sejdeme se teda za hodinku, to znamená, další program pokračuje v 13:15 odpoledními přednáškami. Tady v předsálí je připraveno i občerstvení malé pro vás, po případě dole je ještě bufet. Děkuji moc a uvidíme se za hodinku.